Morning, Calvary. I'll be reading from the Old Testament and the book of Esther. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th day and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the villages who live in the open towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, a holiday on which they send gifts of food to one another. Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, enjoining them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and also the 15th day of the same month, year by year, as the days on which the Jews gained relief from their enemies, and as a month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and presents to the poor. So the Jews adopted a custom of what they had begun to do, as Mordecai had written to them.
Please rise in body or in spirit for the reading of the Gospel. From the 15th chapter of Luke. Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the wealth that will belong to me.' So he divided his assets between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant region, and there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living.
When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the region, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of the region, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled his stomach with pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything.
But when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.'
So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. And he ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.'
But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate.
Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him.
But he answered his father, 'Listen, For all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him."
Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we have to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found."
You may be seated. I have a question for you. Have you ever laughed with God? Consider that for a moment. Have you ever laughed with God? Does it seem silly or disrespectful, maybe? Or perhaps you have certainly laughed with the divine, telling God about some really good, happy news. Or in your time with God, you tell God, "You know I worry, you know," and you start to laugh because God says, "Goodness, it's all you ever do." You think about Sarah from Genesis, who laughed when she heard she would have a son in her old age, laughing in disbelief because she believes physical limitations can determine what God can do. I would guess that a fair number of us might feel odd about laughing with God. Perhaps because laughter can easily go from joy and mirth together to joy and mirth by yourself because you're laughing at someone. Perhaps for that reason, a lot of us, I notice, especially Euro folks, they remain fairly stoic in worship, and that includes myself. We want to appear like we take our faith seriously, and for many of us, having joy in our faith, it walks a line. Perhaps we feel uncomfortable showing our joy in front of others, or we don't want to be distracting. But keep that question in your mind for now. Turning to our story today, the prodigal son or the lost son. It's one of Jesus' more famous parables, one that has gripped the imagination of many a poet and a songwriter. I think of the song, "Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love." And it's also a favorite of many Christians who have felt the warmth and welcome of God's grace when they felt they did not deserve it at all. And the interpretations to this text are incredibly varied. I went on a wild research ride learning about all the ways this parable has been interpreted. And this story, it has so many layers and dynamics to it. We have the younger son who became bored or had a major ethical crisis and lost his way, or who found belonging with the wrong crowd. And he asks for the share of his inheritance, and he leaves. and he is reckless and he spends it all. And he quickly learns how much it takes to pay for rent and food and other necessities. Perhaps he realized how hard his dad worked, how much his dad had to worry about finances, and how much this son took for granted. That's the interpretation I like to stick with. But I read multiple interpretations that say he became desperate and he cooked up a scheme. Some writers call him a con man, to win his father's affections back. And he rehearses a speech to humble himself and at least get in a position of stability as a servant. And for this older son, he has noticed when his father celebrated and when he didn't. And did you notice that this elder son was not invited to this party? He noticed when he was invited and noticed when he wasn't. And likely his father was caught up in welcoming his other son, and it was an accidental omission, but an omission nonetheless. Perhaps like this dad, we also get caught up in the day-to-day of managing our livelihood and our family. Perhaps this dad taught his first child really well, but then took it for granted how good of a human his son was. He forgot to praise him, to verbally express his gratitude for his son. Maybe this second child took up so much more attention. He was always the one pushing boundaries, and he got bored easily, and he always dreamed of getting out. And I think we all do what this dad did. We get used to good behavior. And isn't it funny how good behavior doesn't get as much attention as bad behavior? And yet the good behavior is what we strive for. The bad behavior is what we judge and what we remember. You know, day in and day out, this older son waited for some acknowledgement of his hard work, of his character. The older siblings are always held to a higher standard, aren't they? Many interpreters write that at the end of this parable, the dad still has a lost son, but now it's the older one. And we leave this story with lots of familial damage that needs to be repaired. But for now, the party goes on. The experience of joy is always complicated. It rarely stands by itself. As Pastor Ann touched on last week, joy is often accompanied by other major emotions. You know, we look at our reading from Esther. Talk about a book with complicated emotions. And the Jews were staring down a king's order to exterminate all Jews. And in the nick of time, a new order is written that allows the Jews to defend themselves. And this part of the story, it always gives me pause. Am I supposed to be celebrating that violence and death still happened? Because at least it didn't happen to the Jews. And despite all of this nuance and complication, the Jews celebrate and a new holiday, Purim, is born. And at the end of chapter 8, just before our selected scripture for today, Mordecai, who is a Jew, is revealed as having the highest power position. And Jews realize the power they have, and they cheer and whoop. It says, darkness has turned to light, sadness to joy, shame to honor. And in a very similar vein to the prodigal son, we are left with questions, and yet joy remains. My theological favorite, Amy Jill Levine, she wrote that biblical books are primarily texts that help us ask the right questions rather than provide all the answers. They help us ask the right questions. rather than provide all the answers. We have this temptation when reading biblical texts to simplify things. And if you look at our YouTube comment section, you see Christians upset that we don't simplify things enough at Calvary into right and wrong, black and white. And I have the fun job of responding to them. The prodigal son was joyful to return home and surprised to be welcomed with such a party. And I'm sure he was processing his own guilt, his regret, remorse, and moral injury for years to come. And the older son, he likely felt grateful at some point to have his brother home safe and sound. I imagine that he watches his younger brother sleeping and he hisses at him, "I missed you, jerk face." And he's still processing his own anger and jealousy and emotional baggage for years to come. And I am sure that in the years to follow, the son spending his inheritance would be an irritant to all of them and always a dynamic to their relationship. You know, I imagine they're gathered around the dinner table, kind of ribbing on each other. And the elder son says, "Hey, Jason, remember when you were an absolute idiot and spent half of our fortune? That was fun." And all of this may be true, but that doesn't change the dad's reaction to seeing his son. Joy is enduring like that. You know what I love about the dad in this story is his unbridled, unrestrained joy. You know, we don't know how much time has passed between the son leaving and returning. It could have been years. I imagine the dad searching the horizon every day for some glimpse of hope, some sign of life. And each day the sun sets and it's another day to wait. You know, the text tells us that he saw him from far off. He had been watching. And he runs to meet him. I'm imagining he picks up his robes so that they don't get caught around his feet and runs, kicking up dust. And I don't know why, but I imagine it like this. And so his servants are watching him, squinting. What is that? What is he doing? For those who may be insecure, the display of joy might be seen as embarrassing. But it's actually quite holy, even if it was a bit humorous to see. I asked about your laughter with God at the beginning because I feel like too many times we dampen our joy, especially in a sacred space like this, or in our sacred moments with God. We feel this need to be serious. Perhaps we feel that it's not reverent enough, our joy, or there's also too much sadness and too much anger and grief living in our body at the same time. But our joy is holy. And it's one of the greatest tools that we have to remain resilient. You know, the son, he tries to start his speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." And it's the dad's joy and love that shuts up this son's rehearsed, tired speech. It's a love that does not care about past wrongs. It isn't determined by what you do or don't do, what you say or don't say. It's the same love that persists through poor decisions and heavy consequences, and it remains regardless of circumstance. Where love is, there joy is also. Even if his elder son is upset with him, the dad's love and joy does not change. For this dad, his sons bring him life's meaning and joy, and this joy is like breathing. He says, but we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. We had to. How could we not celebrate? But we readers notice that the story, it doesn't end neatly. It's not tied in a bow. This parable ends with the elder son's anguish and the dad's joy, leaving us to think and meditate on that coexistence together. I think one reason why we struggle with joy is we expect it to look different. We underestimate its ability to persist and remain, just like a parent's love after we've made a big mistake. And in that way, joy surprises us by its presence. And the key is to tap into it even in the midst of complexity. You know, if you think about nearly any occasion, there is always a multitude of emotions that we experience. You know, getting to stand here in this spot with this robe and this stole is a privilege and a joy for me. And you can bet that yesterday and the day before, I was frazzled, more than usual, and asking God to please help me because I was struggling with my message. It felt anything but joyful, but still today, joy. A beautiful wedding that's taken months of preparation and a huge level of detail, lots of stress and worry. And then the moment finally arrives, and it all comes together with tremendous meaning, and you think that was worth it. And a happiness settles over you. Joy. Or a vacation Bible school, followed very quickly by driving 4 teenagers 14 hours to camp. Both taking months of preparation, months of worry and stress as the days approach. Shopping trips, forms, recruiting volunteers, losing volunteers. You wonder, is this ever going to come together? The week before, it absolutely consumes your time and energy. You just keep going day by day. And slowly your lists get checked off and registrations are finalized. Crucial volunteer roles are filled at the last minute. You think, wow, I really didn't think this was going to happen, but here we are setting up. Here we are gathered by a van getting ready to go. Here we are kicking off VBS with high energy songs, and the kids are here. And all of these amazing volunteers are here, proving again that we never do ministry all on our own. It's really happening. I am so tired. And I would not describe the past several weeks as joyful, but joy. Or a memorial service for your loved one. You know, days have bled into nights, and you're really struggling getting the image of their final moments out of your head long enough to get some rest. And at first, you don't want a service, you don't want to deal with people, you don't want to deal with any more details. But it's their final wishes to have a service. And so you proceed, choosing scriptures and hymns and flowers and food. And these cards start to pour in in your mailbox day by day. Some people you haven't talked to in years that are sending their sympathies. And the day finally arrives, and you're stressed about your outfit and family members coming into town, and you just want to retreat and hide, but you arrive at the church, and you are cared for. You see people show up in the pews for your family, and you hear memories of your loved one and sing the hymns and get so many hugs. It's truly exhausting, but there is a joy that is thoroughly intertwined with gratitude. You aren't the only one grieving. And you know now that your loved one insisted on a service because they knew you would need to be cared for. You shake your head and you smile. Them caring for you after their last breath, even in the midst of death. Joy. If you are in a hard season and you really feel like your joy has left you, I very much understand. But I'm here to tell you that it hasn't. Joy remains. Joy endures all things. And you never know when you might have a day and you're not expecting it at all, and joy shows up. Sometimes joy is complicated, but joy remains. Amen.